I'm Camilla, 37 years old, sitting at my mother's polished dining table while she loudly laughs at her own joke. "No wonder you're still single at 37, she announces to everyone present. My smile freezes as I twist my wedding ring safely hidden in my pocket. If only she knew about Marcus, about our courthouse vows exchanged 6 months ago, about the impossible situation forcing us to keep it secret. The weight of her judgment crushes my chest, but I've become an expert at swallowing pain. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you've ever had to keep a major life decision hidden from family. The relationship with my mother Sandra has always been complicated. From my earliest memories, she's been the voice of criticism disguised as helpful advice. "Stand up straight, Camila. That outfit makes you look wide, Camila. You should speak more softly, Camila." Each suggestion delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My childhood home in suburban Pennsylvania was immaculate, just like my mother demanded everything be. Perfect lawn, perfect furniture, perfect daughter. Unfortunately, I was never quite perfect enough. While I excelled academically and developed a passion for writing and marketing, these achievements paled in comparison to my mother's true measure of female success, beauty, popularity, and eventually marriage. My younger sister Tiffany somehow managed to check all the boxes. 3 years my junior, she was naturally graceful, sociable, and compliant in ways I never managed to be. Where I was bookish and independent, Tiffany was agreeable and intuitive about social expectations. She married her college sweetheart at 24, producing two beautiful grandchildren by 30. The perfect daughter. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my 20s, played at every family gathering.
Meanwhile, I was building a career I loved. After graduating with honors from Penn State, I worked my way up from marketing assistant to executive director at one of Philadelphia's top advertising agencies. My campaigns won awards. My salary afforded me a beautiful condo overlooking Rittenhouse Square. Professional success came through hard work and natural talent. Yet at every Sunday dinner, the conversation inevitably circled back to my relationship status. "Jennifer's daughter just got engaged and she's 5 years younger than you," my mother would announce while passing the mashed potatoes. "The biological clock waits for no woman, Camila," she'd remind me over dessert. My father, James, would occasionally interject with a mild, "Leave the girl alone, Sandra." But these defenses were half-hearted at best.
A kind but passive man, he'd learned long ago that standing between Sandra and her opinions was a losing battle. The few relationships I did have were subjected to such intense scrutiny that they wilted under the pressure. There was Daniel, my college boyfriend, who wasn't ambitious enough. Michael, the doctor I dated at 28, who my mother actually approved of, but who couldn't handle her constant hints about grandchildren. Then Jordan, who made the mistake of disagreeing with my mother about politics at Thanksgiving, and was subsequently deemed disrespectful. By 35, I developed a protective shell around my personal life. I shared fewer details. I stopped bringing dates to family events. I deflected questions with vague answers about being focused on my career. But the questions and comments never stopped. If anything, they intensified as I approached what my mother called the danger zone of late 30s singlehood. "You're getting too picky," she'd diagnose. "Men don't want women who challenge them too much," she'd advise. "You'll regret focusing so much on work when you're alone at 50, she'd warn. Each Sunday dinner became an exercise in emotional endurance. I'd drive to the suburbs, sit at the table of my childhood, and brace for the inevitable commentary on my failing personal life. Sometimes I'd fantasize about skipping these dinners altogether, but the guilt would be unbearable. Family was family after all, even when they hurt you. That's the complicated backdrop against which I met Marcus. That's the reason what should have been the happiest time of my life became one of the most stressful. That's why at 37, I found myself sitting at my mother's table, married but pretending to be single, listening to her laugh at my apparent inability to find love. I met Marcus on a rainy Tuesday in October. It was nearly 8 o'clock at night, and I was working late at Open Grounds, my favorite coffee shop near my office. A major pitch was due the next morning, and the fluorescent lights of my corner office had become unbearable around hour 12 of preparation. The cafe was nearly empty when he asked if he could share my table. All the others were occupied by the few remaining patrons, or covered in his architectural drawings that had apparently outgrown his original spot. "I promise I won't disturb you," he said with a warm smile that immediately made me doubt the promise. Not because he seemed untrustworthy, but because that smile was the most disturbing thing I'd encountered all day in the best possible way. Marcus was tall with deep brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled in closely cropped black hair. He wore a simple gray Henley pushed up at the sleeves, revealing forearms marked with pencil smudges. An architect working late just like me. We worked in silence for almost an hour, occasionally catching each other's eyes and quickly looking away. When I finally closed my laptop after sending off the completed presentation, he looked up. "Finish saving the world?" he asked. I laughed. "Just the quarterly marketing plan for a pet food company. Not quite superhero territory." "I don't know," he mused, glancing at his watch. "It's almost 10. Anyone working this late is either saving the world or escaping something." His insight was unexpected and uncomfortably accurate. I was escaping something, the echoes of my mother's voice in my head, always pushing for perfection that never satisfied her anyway. "What's your excuse then?" I countered. He gestured to his drawings. "Client meeting tomorrow. These revisions won't draw themselves." He paused. "Though honestly, I could have done this at home. Sometimes I just need different walls around me." I understood that feeling completely. We introduced ourselves properly, and when the cafe began closing, we continued our conversation on the sidewalk outside, neither of us ready to end this unexpected connection. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining under the streetlights. Our first official date was that Friday. Dinner at a small Ethiopian restaurant he knew, where we ate with our hands and talked for hours. Marcus told me about growing up as the son of Nigerian immigrants in Baltimore. His father, Adebayo, was a respected physician who had moved to America for medical school and stayed to build a practice. His mother, Folami, taught mathematics at a private school. They had raised Marcus and his two younger siblings with high expectations and deep connections to their Nigerian heritage. "My father expected me to follow him into medicine," Marcus explained. "Architecture was a compromise. At least it was a respectable profession, even if it wasn't his first choice for me." I told him about my own family's expectations, about always feeling like I was missing some essential quality my mother valued. "It's like we're speaking different languages," I said. "Everything I value about myself is secondary to her." Marcus nodded in understanding. "That's how my father and I communicate too. I love him deeply, but there's always this gap between what he wants for me and what I want for myself." That shared experience of navigating difficult family dynamics while still loving our families formed an immediate bond between us. Here was someone who understood the complexity of wanting parental approval while needing to live authentically. As weeks turned into months, our relationship deepened. Marcus was thoughtful and attentive in ways I hadn't experienced before. He remembered small details from our conversations. He respected my career ambition because he shared it. He made space for my independence while being dependably present. We fell into an easy rhythm together. Weeknight dinners at my place or his. Weekend explorations of Philadelphia's neighborhoods. Long conversations about everything and nothing. He introduced me to Nigerian food, cooking jollof rice in my kitchen while telling stories of his childhood. I took him to my favorite hidden spots in the city I'd loved since college. 8 months after that rainy night at the coffee shop, Marcus took me to Fairmount Park at sunset. We walked along the river path where we'd had our third date, and he stopped at a bench overlooking the water. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "Camila," he began, taking both my hands in his. "I never expected to find someone who understands me the way you do, who challenges me and supports me in equal measure." When he dropped to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box, I couldn't speak through my tears of joy. The ring was perfect, a vintage emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice catching. "Yes," I said immediately. "Absolutely yes." It was only after the initial euphoria, after calling our closest friends with the news, that we faced the complicated question how to tell our families. Marcus's face grew serious as we sat on my couch that night, still celebrating with champagne. There's something I need to tell you about my father, he said, his voice heavy with concern. What should have been the simplest part of getting married, sharing our joy with family, became the most complicated. Marcus held my hand tightly as he explained his father's situation. Dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 3 months ago, he said, his voice breaking slightly. The doctors are giving him maybe a year, but from what I've researched, that might be optimistic. I squeezed his hand, my heart breaking for him. He'd mentioned his father had been unwell, but hadn't shared the severity until now. I'm so sorry, Marcus, I whispered. He nodded, gathering himself. There's more. Dad has always been very traditional about family. When my older sister Amara married outside our Nigerian culture 5 years ago, it caused a huge rift. They barely spoke for 2 years. I felt a cold understanding begin to dawn. And now that he's sick, every conversation turns to his legacy, his grandchildren, his desire to see our family's traditions continued. Marcus confirmed. He's been asking when I'm going to marry a nice Nigerian girl from a good family. The implication hung in the air between us. I wasn't Nigerian. I wasn't the daughter-in-law Adebayo Okafor had envisioned for his only son. I love you, Camila, Marcus said fiercely. I want to marry you, but I'm torn about the timing. Dad doesn't have much time left, and I don't want his final months filled with family conflict. We talked late into the night exploring our options. We could proceed with wedding plans and risk creating family drama during Adebayo's final months. We could postpone our engagement until after his passing, which felt both morbid and dishonest. Or we could find a middle path. What if we have a small civil ceremony now? Marcus suggested around midnight. Just us and a couple of close friends as witnesses. We can be married in reality, but we'll wait to have a formal wedding celebration and announcement until later. You mean keep our marriage secret? The idea made me uncomfortable. For how long? Marcus looked down. I don't know. Until after Dad passes, or until his condition deteriorates enough that the shock wouldn't affect his health. I sat with the idea, turning it over in my mind. It felt wrong to start our marriage with secrecy. Yet I also understood Marcus's impossible position caught between his love for me and his love for his dying father. What about my family? I asked. They're not going to be happy about being kept in the dark either. Marcus acknowledged this with a nod. I know it's asking a lot, but your parents are healthy. We'll have years to make it up to them. My dad doesn't have that time. I thought about my mother's certain reaction to both the news of my engagement and the plan to delay a proper wedding. There would be disapproval attempts to take control, probably insistence on immediate wedding planning, the exact opposite of what Marcus needed during the sensitive time with his father. After much discussion, we made our difficult decision. We would have a civil ceremony with just 2 friends present. We would continue living separately most of the time to maintain appearances, though, in practice, we'd stay together at Marcus's apartment most nights. We would delay our announcement and formal wedding until after Adebayo's situation was resolved one way or another. It was a compromise born of compassion, but it came with costs. Every Sunday dinner became an exercise in deception. My mother's continuing comments about my single status cutting deeper now that they were technically untrue. I started removing my wedding ring before family visits, keeping it in my pocket, where I could touch it for reassurance. The pressure from my mother continued unabated. 37 is a difficult age to find someone, Camilla, she'd say with practiced concern. Men your age want younger women. Maybe you should consider freezing your eggs. Each comment required silent strength not to respond with the truth. Each family event became a performance. The emotional toll grew with each passing week. Meanwhile, Marcus faced his own struggle visiting his father at the hospital, or his parents' home hearing Adebayo's increasing focus on family continuity as his health declined. The dual weight of grief for his father and guilt about our secret strained Marcus visibly. I hate asking you to do this, he told me one night after a particularly difficult day at his parents' house. It feels wrong. It is wrong, I admitted. But sometimes life doesn't give us perfect choices. We're doing the best we can with an impossible situation. What we thought might be a matter of weeks stretched into months. Adebayo's decline was slower than expected, a blessing for his remaining time, but a complication for our situation. The weight of secrecy grew heavier with each passing day. Our wedding day dawned bright and clear, a beautiful spring morning that felt like a good omen despite the complicated circumstances. We'd chosen the Philadelphia City Hall for our civil ceremony, appreciating both its architectural beauty and the simplicity it offered. Marcus wore a sharply tailored blue suit, and I chose a simple ivory sheath dress with a vintage lace overlay. Not the elaborate wedding gown I might have imagined, but perfect for our intimate occasion. I carried a small bouquet of white roses and eucalyptus. Our witnesses were my best friend Amelia and Marcus's college roommate David, the only two people we trusted completely with our secret. They met us on the grand staircase, Amelia hugging me tightly. "You look beautiful," she whispered, "and you're doing the right thing no matter how complicated it feels right now." The ceremony itself was brief, but surprisingly emotional. Standing before the officiant, exchanging vows with the man I loved, while sunlight streamed through the historic windows, I felt the full weight of the moment. These weren't just words, they were promises we were making in the face of significant obstacles. When Marcus slipped the simple gold band onto my finger, his hands trembled slightly. "I, Marcus, take you, Camilla, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When I repeated the same vows, my voice broke on, "in sickness and in health," thinking of his father and the situation that had shaped our unusual wedding day. "By the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared with a warm smile. "You may kiss the bride." Marcus's kiss was tender and lingering, communicating everything words couldn't. Whatever complications surrounded us, this moment was real and true. Amelia took photos on my phone, capturing our first moments as husband and wife. After the ceremony, the four of us went to a small French restaurant for lunch, toasting with champagne and sharing a wedding cake the restaurant had prepared specially. "To Marcus and Camilla," David raised his glass. "May your marriage be long and happy, and may the unusual beginning just be an interesting story to tell someday." We spent our wedding night at the Rittenhouse Hotel, a luxury I'd insisted on, despite our need for discretion. "We're only getting married once," I told Marcus. "Some things shouldn't be compromised." The next morning brought the strange reality of our situation into focus. I returned to my condo to maintain appearances. Marcus went back to his apartment, which would increasingly become our shared home, though unofficially. We settled into a peculiar routine. I kept clothes and essentials at his place. Most nights I stayed there, returning to my condo to collect mail and maintain appearances. We wore our wedding rings at home, but removed them for family visits. We referred to each other as boyfriend and girlfriend, in public saving husband and wife for private moments. To make our unconventional beginning feel special despite the secrecy, we created our own traditions. Monthly anniversaries celebrated with home-cooked dinners, a shared journal where we wrote messages to each other about our married life, weekend getaways to nearby towns where we could be anonymous and wear our rings freely. But living a double life took its toll. The constant vigilance was exhausting. I began declining some family dinners, unable to face my mother's comments. Marcus grew quieter after each visit with his parents, the weight of his father's illness, and our secret creating a visible burden. We had our first serious argument 3 months into our marriage. After a Sunday dinner, where my mother had been particularly insistent about setting me up with a colleague's son, I came to Marcus's apartment in tears. "I can't keep doing this," I said, pacing his living room. "Do you know what it's like to sit there while she tries to set me up with someone? While she picks apart everything about me that she thinks is keeping me single, it's humiliating." Marcus sat heavily on the couch. "What do you want me to say, Camilla? I know it's awful. I know I'm asking too much of you." "Then let's tell them," I pushed. "At least my family. My mother is cruel sometimes, but she's not dying. She can handle the truth." "And what happens when she knows?" Marcus asked quietly. "You think she'll keep it to herself? That it won't somehow get back to my family? Baltimore and Philadelphia aren't that far apart. Our families have mutual acquaintances through my parents' academic circles." He was right, and I knew it, which only made me more frustrated. We went to bed that night without resolving anything, the few inches of space between us feeling like miles. The next morning, Marcus brought me coffee in bed, sitting beside me with his own cup. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I never wanted to put you in this position." I took his hand. "I know. I'm sorry too. I knew what I was agreeing to." We recommitted to our plan, but the strain continued to grow. Each family dinner, each hospital visit with his father, each deception added weight to our shoulders. Our secret marriage, begun with love and hope despite the circumstances, was being tested in ways we hadn't anticipated. 6 months into our secret marriage, the situation reached its breaking point. Adebayo's condition had stabilized somewhat with a new treatment protocol. While this was wonderful news for Marcus's family, it extended our limbo indefinitely. Meanwhile, my mother had escalated from general comments about my single status to active matchmaking. The Sunday dinner that would ultimately change everything began with her triumphant announcement as I arrived. "Camilla, perfect timing. You remember Linda from my garden club? Her son Patrick is joining us today. He's just moved back to Philadelphia to take a position at Jefferson Hospital, a cardiologist." My stomach dropped as I entered the dining room to find an unfamiliar man rising from his seat at our family table. Patrick was conventionally handsome, in a forgettable way, with carefully styled hair and an expensive watch visible beneath his cuff. "Nice to meet you," I managed, shooting a betrayed look at my father, who studiously examined his water glass. My sister Tiffany sat across the table, her husband beside her, giving me a sympathetic grimace. Their children, thankfully, were absent, having been sent to a movie with their other grandparents, undoubtedly to facilitate this ambush setup. "Patrick was just telling us about his work in Boston," my mother gushed. "So impressive. And he's looking for a nice home in Rittenhouse Square. That's near you, isn't it, Camila?" The next 2 hours were excruciating. Patrick seemed nice enough, but clearly uncomfortable with my mother's transparent matchmaking. I answered questions mechanically, while internally cycling between anger at my mother and guilt about my deception. After dessert, while helping clear plates in the kitchen, my sister cornered me. "What is going on with you?" Tiffany asked in a low voice. "You've been acting strange for months. Is there something you're not telling us?" I nearly broke then, almost confessing everything to my sister, who, despite our differences, had always been my ally in navigating our mother's expectations. "I'm just tired of these setups," I said instead. "It's humiliating." Tiffany frowned. "It's more than that. You've been distant, canceling dinners, changing the subject whenever anyone asks about your life." She paused. "Is it Marcus' mom mentioned you've been seeing someone named Marcus?" I flinched at hearing his name in this context. "It's complicated, Tiff." "Complicated how?" she pressed. "Are you in trouble? Is he married or something?" The irony of her question nearly made me laugh hysterically. "No, nothing like that. I just need some space from Mom's constant pressure." Tiffany looked unconvinced, but was interrupted by our mother entering with more dishes. "You girls are taking forever," she complained. "Patrick is telling your father about his vintage car collection. Come back out before your father's eyes glaze over completely." The evening finally ended, with Patrick politely declining my mother's suggestion that he walk me to my car to make sure I got there safely. I drove home to Marcus's apartment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived, Marcus took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. "What happened?" I told him about the setup, about Tiffany's questions, about the increasing impossibility of our situation. "It's getting worse," I concluded. "My mother's not going to stop, and I'm running out of excuses." Marcus sat heavily on the couch, running a hand over his face. "My father asked me yesterday when I was going to settle down. Said he wants to know I'll be taken care of when he's gone." His voice broke slightly. I almost told him then. The next week brought more close calls. A colleague who saw Marcus kiss me goodbye outside my office building congratulated me on my engagement, noticing my ring before I could hide it. I hurriedly explained it was just a gift, not an engagement ring, mentally noting to be more careful. Then Marcus ran into my cousin at a grocery store while wearing his wedding band, having forgotten to remove it after a weekend away. He managed to distract from the ring, but came home rattled by the near discovery. The following Sunday dinner was the breaking point. Seated at my mother's table, pushing food around my plate while half-heartedly answering questions about work, I was unprepared for her casual cruelty. "Patrick asked about you, Camilla." She mentioned serving salad. "I told him you were just focusing on your career right now." I nodded noncommittally, hoping the subject would change. "You know," my mother continued with a little laugh, looking around the table as if sharing a joke. "No wonder you're still single at 37. All work and no play, never making an effort with the nice men I introduce you to." The table fell silent. My father looked uncomfortable. Tiffany and her husband exchanged glances, but my mother didn't notice, continuing cheerfully. "When I was your age, I already had both of you girls and was running the household perfectly while supporting your father's career. But times change, I suppose. Not everyone can have it all." Something snapped inside me. 6 months of deception, years of criticism, a lifetime of never being enough crystallized in that moment. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not single." My mother looked up, surprised by my interruption of her monologue, but pleased by the content. "Oh, you're seeing someone? Why haven't you mentioned it? When can we meet him?" "I'm not seeing someone," I corrected, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my wedding ring. I slipped it onto my finger where it belonged. "I'm married." The silence that followed was absolute. "You're what?" My mother's voice came out as a strangled whisper, her face draining of color. I held up my left hand, the gold band catching the light. "I'm married, have been for 6 months now." My father's fork clattered against his plate. Tiffany's mouth dropped open. My mother stared at me as if I'd announced I was from another planet. "That's not possible," she finally managed. "You can't be married. There wasn't a wedding. We're your family." "There was a wedding," I said firmly. "A small civil ceremony at City Hall. Just us and 2 friends." "Who?" my mother demanded. "Who did you marry?" "Marcus. Marcus Okafor. We've been together for over a year." "The architect?" my father asked, finding his voice. "The one you mentioned a few times?" I nodded, somewhat surprised he'd remembered. My mother's shock was quickly transitioning to anger. "This is absurd. You expect us to believe you got married without telling your own family? What kind of person does that?" "The kind who's tired of having every life choice criticized." I answered, surprising myself with my candor. "The kind who wanted to avoid exactly this kind of reaction." "What reaction?" she shot back. "The completely normal reaction of a mother who's just been told her daughter had a secret wedding, who's been lied to for months." "Sandra," my father cautioned, "maybe we should all take a breath." But my mother was too wounded to stop. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look? What will I tell people? That my daughter didn't think her own parents deserved to be at her wedding? That she's been lying to everyone for half a year?" "This isn't about you, Mom," I said, feeling strangely calm in the center of the storm I'd created. "It's complicated. There were reasons." "What possible reason could justify this?" she demanded. I took a deep breath. "Marcus's father is dying, terminal pancreatic cancer. He's very traditional and wanted Marcus to marry within their Nigerian culture. We decided to wait to announce our marriage until after his father passed to avoid causing family conflict during his final months." This revelation quieted the table momentarily. My father's expression softened with understanding, but my mother's hardened further. "So his family was worth protecting, but we weren't," she asked coldly. "His father's feelings mattered, but your mother's didn't." "It wasn't like that," I tried to explain. "His father is dying. We thought we were making the best choice in an impossible situation." "Well, congratulations," my mother said bitterly. "You've managed to hurt everyone involved. I hope you're satisfied with your choices." She stood and walked out of the dining room, leaving a weighted silence behind her. Tiffany reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm shocked, Cam, but I understand complicated family situations. Give Mom time." My father nodded slowly. "Your mother will come around. She's hurt right now." He paused, looking at me seriously. "I wish we could have been there, Camilla. I would have liked to walk my daughter down the aisle." His quiet disappointment was somehow harder to bear than my mother's anger. "I'm sorry, Dad. We thought we were doing the right thing." When I left an hour later, my mother still hadn't emerged from her bedroom. I drove straight to Marcus's apartment, our home, and told him what had happened. He held me while I cried, then made a difficult decision of his own. "We need to tell my parents now," he said firmly, "before they hear it from someone else. Your mother might reach out to them directly." The next morning, we drove to Baltimore together. Marcus had called ahead asking to speak with both his parents about something important. Given his father's condition, such requests were taken seriously. We found Adebayo propped up in a hospital bed that had been set up in the family's living room. Despite his illness, he maintained an air of dignity. His mother Folami sat beside him, her face showing the strain of months of caregiving. "Son," Adebayo greeted Marcus, his voice weaker than I remembered from our few previous meetings. His eyes turned to me with polite curiosity. "And Camila, this is a surprise." Marcus took my hand, drawing strength from the contact. "Mom, Dad, we have something to tell you." He explained our situation directly but gently. How we'd fallen in love, decided to marry, but feared causing distress during Adebayo's illness. How we'd chosen a civil ceremony with plans for a proper wedding later. How my family had just discovered the truth. Folami listened with increasing distress, tears forming in her eyes. Adebayo's expression remained unreadable until Marcus finished speaking. The silence that followed was broken by Adebayo's labored breathing. Finally, he spoke. "You thought I would object to your happiness because she is not Nigerian?" He asked, his voice thin but clear. Marcus nodded. "After how things went with Amara." Adebayo closed his eyes briefly. "That was different. Her husband showed no respect for our culture for me. He made no effort." His eyes opened, focusing on me. "Have you met my son's family before today? Broken bread with us?" "Yes, sir," I answered. "Several times before your health declined." "And did you enjoy our food? Ask questions about our traditions?" I nodded. "Marcus has taught me to cook some Nigerian dishes. I've been learning about Nigerian wedding traditions too for when we have our formal ceremony." A ghost of a smile touched Adebayo's lips. "Yet you assumed I would reject you." "Dad," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "After Amara, I thought—" "You thought I hadn't learned anything," Adebayo interrupted with surprising strength. "That losing my daughter's presence in my life for 2 years taught me nothing." Folami placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. "Your father has regretted that rift every day, Marcus." "We both have." She turned to me. "This isn't how we would have wanted things to happen, but you are welcome in our family, Camila." Adebayo nodded weakly. "I would have liked to see my son married, to give my blessing in person." The guilt on Marcus's face was heartbreaking. I squeezed his hand in support. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said simply. "What's done is done," Adebayo replied. "Now we must move forward. When I am gone, you will have your proper wedding celebration. And until then, no more secrets." We left Baltimore that evening emotionally drained, but with a sense of resolution. Marcus was quieter than usual on the drive home. "Are you okay?" I asked as Philadelphia's skyline came into view. He nodded slowly. "I think so. It wasn't what I expected." "Your father surprised you." "He's always been capable of that," Marcus admitted. "I should have trusted him more. Trusted us more." The following weeks were challenging as both families processed their feelings about our deception. My mother refused my calls for nearly a month. Marcus's parents welcomed us for weekly visits, Adebayo often taking time alone with Marcus to talk, perhaps aware that their time together was limited. Slowly, painfully, we began rebuilding trust with our families. The secrecy that had seemed necessary had ultimately caused more pain than it prevented a lesson we were learning the hard way. The most difficult period of my life unfolded in the weeks following our revelation. My mother's silence was a new kind of pain, different from her criticism, but no less cutting. My father acted as intermediary, assuring me she needed time, that she would eventually forgive me. Meanwhile, Marcus's father's health took a sudden downturn. The cancer had spread to his liver, and his lucid periods became fewer and farther between. Marcus spent every available moment in Baltimore, sometimes staying overnight, while I returned to Philadelphia for work. During one of these nights alone, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, I found my sister Tiffany standing there with a bottle of wine. "Thought you might need this," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. As she uncorked the wine and poured 2 generous glasses, I waited for the interrogation to begin. Instead, She handed me a glass and clinked hers against it. To my secretly married big sister, she toasted with a small smile, who finally did something Mom couldn't control. I took a grateful sip. How is she? Still hurt, still angry, still Mom. Tiffany shrugged. But she's talking about it now instead of pretending you don't exist, which is progress. We settled on my couch, and for the first time I told my sister the full story of my relationship with Marcus, our decision to marry quietly, and the strain of keeping our secret. I get why you did it, Tiffany said when I finished. I don't know if I would have had the courage to go against Mom like that. It wasn't courage, I admitted. It was avoidance. And it backfired spectacularly. Maybe, Tiffany conceded. But you did something for yourself, not for Mom's approval. That's new for you. Her words stayed with me long after she left. Had my entire life been shaped around seeking my mother's impossible approval? Had I been so focused on proving myself worthy that I'd forgotten to live authentically? These questions surfaced again a week later, when Marcus called from Baltimore with news. His father had taken another turn for the worse and was asking for both of us. I drove to Baltimore immediately, finding the Okafor home filled with extended family. Marcus met me at the door, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. "He's asking for us," he said, leading me upstairs to his parents' bedroom, where Adebayo had been moved for comfort. The frail figure in the bed barely resembled the proud man I'd first met over a year ago. Fulami sat beside him, holding his hand, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. She stood when we entered, embracing both of us, before leaving to give us privacy with Adebayo. "My son," Adebayo whispered, his voice barely audible, "and his wife." Marcus knelt beside the bed, taking his father's hand. I stood beside him, resting my hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I'm here, Dad," Marcus said. Adebayo's breathing was labored, each word clearly requiring effort. "I have been thinking about your wedding." Marcus exchanged a concerned glance with me. "Dad, don't worry about that now." "No," Adebayo insisted with surprising firmness. "I want to give you my blessing, properly." He gestured weakly for me to come closer. When I knelt beside Marcus, Adebayo placed his hand atop our joined ones. "Be good to each other," he said. "Honor each other's traditions. Build something new together." His eyes drifted closed for a moment, gathering strength. "I give you my blessing. I am sorry I will not see your children." Marcus couldn't speak through his tears. I found my voice. "Thank you. That means everything to us." Adebayo nodded slightly, his energy clearly fading. "Now go. Let me rest. Send your mother to me." We left the room, Marcus leaning heavily on me. Fulami went in to sit with her husband, and we joined the family gathering downstairs. That night, surrounded by Marcus's extended family, I witnessed the beauty of their traditions. The prayers offered, the stories shared, the community, supporting each other through grief. Adebayo passed peacefully 2 days later, with Fulami and all three of his children at his bedside. The funeral was a beautiful blend of Nigerian traditions and American customs, a fitting tribute to a man who had bridged two cultures. During the service, I sat beside Marcus, offering silent support as he delivered a moving eulogy about his father's legacy of determination, excellence, and eventually acceptance. After the funeral, as mourners gathered at the Okafor home, my phone rang. It was my mother. "I heard about Marcus's father," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in months. "I'm sorry for your loss. Both of you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. 2 weeks later, she invited us to Sunday dinner. The atmosphere was tense. At first, my mother clearly making an effort to be civil, but not quite managing warmth. My father, in contrast, welcomed Marcus enthusiastically, eager to know his new son-in-law. As we prepared to leave that evening, my mother pulled me aside in the hallway. "I'm still hurt, Camila," she said frankly. "I miss my daughter's wedding. That's not something I can just get over." I nodded, accepting her feelings. "I understand, Mom. But," she continued, "I've been thinking about why you felt you couldn't tell me, about why you thought I would make things difficult." She looked down, uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I haven't always been the mother you needed." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from her. I reached out and squeezed her hand. We both made mistakes. I should have been honest with you. Yes, you should have, she agreed, a hint of her usual firmness returning. Now about this proper wedding ceremony Marcus's mother mentioned. I smiled despite myself. Some things would never change entirely, but something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. For perhaps the first time we were seeing each other clearly. Over the following months, as Marcus processed his grief and our families adjusted to our marriage, we began planning the wedding celebration we'd originally postponed. It would be a blend of American and Nigerian traditions, hosted in Philadelphia, with both families fully involved. Fulami became an unexpected ally, gently redirecting my mother when her planning became too controlling. In Nigerian tradition, the bride's family and groom's family each have important roles. She would explain seamlessly, creating space for compromise. My relationship with my mother evolved too. Having finally broken free from my pattern of seeking her approval at all costs, I could engage with her more authentically. I set boundaries when needed, but also recognized her efforts to change. After one particularly productive wedding planning session, where my mother actually deferred to my preference on centerpieces, she asked me to stay after the others left. I've been thinking about what you said. She began arranging flower samples with careful precision. About why you kept your marriage secret. I waited, giving her space to continue. I've always wanted the best for you, Camila. Always. But I realize now that I've been defining best by my own standards, not yours. She looked up at me. I'm trying to do better. I know, Mom, I said. I see that. 6 months after Adebayo's passing, we held our formal wedding celebration. Under a flower-adorned canopy in the botanical gardens, surrounded by both our families, Marcus and I renewed our vows. I wore a gown that combined Western styling with fabric and accents from Nigeria, a visual representation of our blended lives. During the reception, my father gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. To find love is a blessing, he said, raising his glass. To choose to build a life together is courage. Camila and Marcus, you've already weathered storms that would challenge any marriage. You've learned the hard way that honesty and communication are the foundation of not just marriage, but all family relationships. May the lessons of your beginning guide you toward a long and joyful future together. It's been 2 years since that painful Sunday dinner, when my mother laughed about me being single at 37, unknowingly mocking a marriage she knew nothing about. 2 years of healing growth and rebuilding family relationships on new, healthier foundations. The journey hasn't been easy. Trust once broken takes time to repair. But something beautiful has emerged from the painful aftermath of our secret marriage. By facing the consequences of our choices, Marcus and I found strength we didn't know we had both as individuals and as a couple. My relationship with my mother has transformed in ways I never imagined possible. The criticism hasn't disappeared entirely. Of course, old habits die hard. But there's a new respect between us, an acknowledgement of boundaries that makes her occasional lapses into old patterns more manageable. Last month, when I announced my pregnancy at Sunday dinner, my mother's joy was unrestrained, but also tempered with restraint I wouldn't have recognized before. I'm so happy for you both, she said, embracing me warmly. Then, with visible effort, she added, and I promise to ask before offering any advice about the baby. Marcus and I exchanged amused glances, both recognizing the monumental nature of that promise, from a woman who had built her identity around knowing the right way to do everything. Fulami visits often from Baltimore, helping prepare for her first grandchild with quiet excitement. She's brought traditional Nigerian baby clothes and has been teaching me lullabies in Yoruba, creating connections to the heritage that will be part of our child's identity. The journey to this point taught me the most valuable lesson of my adult life. Hiding who you are and whom you love never leads to happiness. Authenticity requires courage, sometimes demanding difficult conversations and painful confrontations. But the freedom it brings is worth every uncomfortable moment. I've learned that family love is complicated but resilient, that parents and children can hurt each other deeply, yet find paths to healing. That cultural differences can become sources of richness rather than division when approached with respect and openness. Most importantly, I've learned that living to please others, even those we love deeply, ultimately serves no one. My mother's approval, which I sought so desperately for decades, came only when I stopped pursuing it and instead became fully myself. Marcus and I sometimes talk about what we would do differently if we could go back. We agree that while our intentions were good, our approach was flawed. Secrecy rarely protects those we love. It only postpones inevitable pain and often compounds it. But we don't dwell on regrets. Instead, we focus on building our future with honesty and courage as our foundation. We're creating a home where our child will be encouraged to live authentically, to navigate family expectations with love, but also with healthy boundaries. As I feel the first flutters of our baby's movements, I think about the stories we'll tell them someday. About their grandfather, Adebayo's final blessing. About how their parents learned the hard way, that truth, however difficult, is always the path to freedom. About how families can bend without breaking, can hurt each other deeply, but heal even deeper. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone's feelings and living your truth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please subscribe if you want to hear more about my journey through motherhood and continuing adventures in family dynamics. Like this video if my story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that authenticity, while sometimes painful in the moment, is always the path to true happiness. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that even the most complicated family situations can heal with time, honesty, and love.